There are places in America that used to exist. Towns with churches, schools, cemeteries, corner stores. Communities where people built lives, raised children, buried their dead. And then, one day the government decided those places needed to disappear. Not slowly, not gradually, by force. This is the story of the towns America erased, and the people it erased them with. Peacher, Oklahoma. Start in the northeastern corner of Oklahoma, in a region called the Tri-State Mining District. For decades, Peacher was a booming lead and zinc mining town. At its peak, the mines beneath it supplied a third of the lead, and zinc used in World War I. The town had 14,000 residents. It had a high school football team. It had a future. What it also had, buried underneath every street and backyard and school playground, was a century's worth of toxic mining waste, mountains of it called chat, a fine silica dust laced with lead. The groundwater was poisoned. Children in Peacher tested for lead poisoning at rates that alarmed federal investigators. The ground itself was so hollowed out by mining tunnels that entire neighborhoods were at risk of simply collapsing. In 2006, the federal government declared Peacher the most toxic place in the United States and offered buyouts to residents. Most took them. A tornado in 2008 destroyed much of what remained. By 2009, Peacher was officially dissolved. One man refused to leave. Wendell Pickard, the last holdout, stayed until he died. The chat piles are still there. The town is not. Rondo, Arkansas. Not every erasure came from pollution or warfare. Some came from highways. Rondo was a black community in Lee County, Arkansas, a tight-knit neighborhood that had built itself up over generations after the Civil War. Churches, homes, a community that had survived Jim Crow, that had persisted through everything the South had thrown at it. In the 1960s, Interstate 40 was routed directly through Rondo. The homes were condemned. The residents were displaced. The community, which had no political power to fight back and no lawyers to challenge the taking, was simply removed. This wasn't unusual. Across the United States, the interstate highway system, one of the most celebrated public works projects in American history, was deliberately routed through black and low-income neighborhoods. Urban planners and politicians used the highways as instruments of urban renewal, which was frequently a polite term for destroying communities of color that white residents and city officials wanted gone. Rondo was not the exception. It was the rule. Hundreds of communities like it were bulldozed for roads that were designed, in part, to never have to pass through neighborhoods that mattered to the people making the decisions. Johns Island's disappeared communities, and Centralia, Pennsylvania. Some towns weren't destroyed by highways or toxic waste. They were destroyed by fire. Centralia, Pennsylvania, was a coal mining community of about 1,000 people in the 1980s. In 1962, a fire was lit in a trash dump adjacent to an abandoned coal strip mine. The fire spread underground into the mine veins, and it never stopped. The earth began to crack. Sinkholes opened in roads and backyards. Carbon monoxide levels rose dangerously. In 1981, a 12-year-old boy was walking across his grandmother's backyard when the ground collapsed beneath him, opening a hole 60 feet deep that he barely survived. Steam began rising from cracks in the streets. Congress approved funds to relocate Centralia's residents. Most left. A handful refused. By 1992, the state condemned all the properties. By 2020, only 5 people remained, still fighting in court for the right to stay in a town that was, for all practical purposes, gone. The fire is still burning. Geologists estimate it could burn for another 250 years. Seneca Village, New York City. Some erasures happened in the middle of the most famous city on Earth and were so thoroughly accomplished that almost no one alive today has ever heard of the place. In the 1820s, a community called Seneca Village established itself on the rocky, hilly land in the middle of Manhattan, land that was cheap because no one thought much of it. It became one of the most significant free black communities in New York City. Residents owned their land, they voted, they had 3 churches, 2 schools, and a cemetery. By the 1850s, about 260 people lived there. In 1855, the city of New York decided that this land, This particular stretch of rocky, hilly Manhattan would be the perfect location for Central Park. The residents of Seneca Village were declared squatters by newspapers and city officials, even though many of them held clear legal title to their land. They were given little notice. The city used eminent domain to take the properties at prices the residents had no power to negotiate. In 1857, Seneca Village was demolished. Today, Central Park is one of the most beloved public spaces in the world. Beneath the Ramble, beneath the Great Lawn, are the foundations of a community that was erased so completely that for over 100 years, historians didn't even know it had existed. Every one of these towns had something in common. The people who lived in them were not the people making the decisions. The miners of Peacher couldn't stop the mining companies from poisoning their town. The residents of Rondo couldn't stop the highway planners. The people of Seneca Village couldn't stop a city that had decided their land was worth more than their lives. Eminent domain, the government's power to take private property for public use, has always been described as a necessary tool, and sometimes it is. But the history of who loses their towns and who doesn't is not random. It follows lines of wealth and race and power with remarkable consistency. The towns that got erased were almost always towns that couldn't fight back. And there's something else worth sitting with. For every Centralia or Peacher that people still talk about, there are dozens of Seneca villages, places so completely destroyed that the only evidence they existed is what a few stubborn historians dug out of old tax records and church ledgers. The map doesn't show what used to be there. The map only shows what survived. And that, perhaps, is the most unsettling thing of all. History is written by the people who are still standing. The towns that were erased can't tell their own stories.